Topping today's news, the Prime Minister shares details on his meeting with U.S. officials in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday. The Bahamas ambassador to Washington gives an account of the Prime Minister's performance in those high-level meetings. And former Prime Minister Dr. Minnis says he will be running in the Kalani constituency next election with or without an F&M nomination. This is your Jcn Evening News. I'm Jarino Saunders. It's a pleasure to have you join us. On Tuesday, Prime Minister Philip Davis and leaders from the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States were in Washington, D.C. for meetings with United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio and U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. During a press conference in the press lounge at the Lynden Pindling International Airport, the Prime Minister shared details on some of the topics discussed. He reported that our American partners have expressed a clear willingness to aid and engage with the Bahamas on current issues that are important to both countries. According to Prime Minister Davis, the subject of public health care services in relation to the healthcare system was also discussed in relation to accessing professionals from various countries like Cuba.
We understand the global demand, but the Bahamas cannot afford to lose its core healthcare workforce without conversation and without coordination and collaboration. I found our U.S. counterparts receptive and respectful of that concern. They recognized the pressure we are under, and they expressed a willingness to explore responsible frameworks for discussion and cooperation on healthcare labor.
The Prime Minister informed the U.S. officials that public health care facilities in the Bahamas have been strained because of high recruitment numbers from the Bahamas, which forced the government of the Bahamas to bring in health care workers from countries like Cuba and now Ghana. A wide range of topics from regional security, economic development, digital assets, and strengthening bilateral relations between the Bahamas and the United States were discussed yesterday at the high-level meetings in the United States. Prime Minister Philip Davis met with, top officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, both of whom, by the way, have homes here in the Bahamas. Bahamas ambassador to the United States, Wendell Jones, attended the high-level meetings between the Bahamas and the U.S., and he shared his views on the Prime Minister's communication in relation to U.S. concerns about the Cuban labor program.
We were fantastically pleased and proud of the Prime Minister's performance in the State Department in particular, as he addressed the main issues that are current. One having to do with Cuban doctors and nurses operating in the Bahamas. And the Prime Minister gave a very good account of his government and the extent to which we are not supporting forced labor and are encouraging Cubans to abide by the laws of the Bahamas as well as the United States of America. It was clear that the prime ministers of the other countries, they were in total agreement with the Prime Minister's position.
Also high on the agenda was the United States' concerns regarding the footprint that China now has in the Bahamas and the wider community. Ambassador Jones said the Prime Minister purported himself well in this regard.
The Prime Minister made it clear to the Secretary of State that the Bahamas is not involved in any forced labor, and that we have told the Cuban authorities that we are paying Cuban nurses the same amount of money that Bahamian nurses enjoy. What is also very important is that the Prime Minister was able to say that in the month of May, some 60 nurses are leaving the Bahamas, Bahamians, because the United States has been complicit in getting Cuban nurses to leave the Bahamas, sometimes for 3 times more than they are paid in the Bahamas, and their families are given incentives to stay in the United States. And so that level of complicity, I believe, resonated around the table. And the Secretary of State was hard-pressed to rebut some of the comments that were made by the Prime Minister. On the issue of Chinese influence in the region, the Prime Minister made it very clear that the Bahamas needed to improve its infrastructure, especially in healthcare, and that the Americans were not forthcoming in terms of granting loans to the Bahamas. And he made it clear that the Bahamas pays its bills on a timely basis, and that the Chinese were forthcoming and knocking on our doors and giving loans that are acceptable to the government of the Bahamas. And he asked the Secretary of State, what would you do? And so he made it clear that as Prime Minister, he was operating in the national interest of the Bahamas and Bahamians. Made it clear that after Hurricane Dorian, we lost a lot of our infrastructure, particularly in the healthcare sector, and that he needed 2 hospitals, one in Grand Bahama and the other in New Providence. And it resonated again that the Bahamas needed these loans to build these healthcare facilities, and that the Bahamas was friend of all and foe of none, and had no difficulty dealing with China, and discounted what is called Chinese influence in the Bahamas. And he invited the American government to be involved in engagement, to continue to engage the Bahamas in these needs that the Bahamas has.
We'll have more from the ambassador's point of view in a later report. The Office of the U.S. State Department also issuing a statement on the outcomes of those meetings with the Caribbean leaders on Tuesday. The U.S. underscored the urgent need for enhanced regional cooperation to combat drug and firearms trafficking and illegal migration. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio encouraging Caribbean partners to strengthen intelligence sharing, security cooperation, and border security through initiatives like the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. He urged the Caribbean leaders to make responsible, transparent decisions when selecting vendors and contractors for critical infrastructure projects, ensuring that they are not vulnerable to privacy and security risks and exploitation. He also reaffirmed the United States' commitment to holding accountable Cuban officials and foreign government officials involved in facilitating what he described as the Cuban forced labor scheme. With the hurricane season less than 1 month away, Secretary Rubio announced the reactivation of 2 U.S. programs to strengthen early warning systems and provide rapid life-saving assistance across the Caribbean. Leader of the opposition, Michael Pintard, also weighing in on the Prime Minister's meetings with U.S. officials, where U.S. officials advised Caribbean leaders to be cautious when dealing with China. Opposition leader Michael Pintard gave his thoughts on this matter.
The Bahamas has to primarily act in its own interest. And therefore, I certainly believe that we look for opportunities where they can be of benefit to the Bahamian people. We should also take into consideration who our primary allies are and seek to have engagement with them to hear whatever their concerns are. But ultimately, we have to act within the interests of the Bahamian people.
Pintard said the ongoing dialogue highlights the importance of strategic international partnerships and careful oversight in national development efforts, ensuring the interests of the Bahamian people remain a top priority. And finally, in this segment, while members of Parliament continued debate on the Executive Entities Amendment Bill 2025 and the Bank and Trust Regulations Amendment Act 2025, former Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis, the incumbent Member of Parliament for Kalani, who will not get a nomination from his party, let it be known that he will seek to be re-elected, not as an independent, but as a member of the Free National Movement.
I come to this place every meeting as a member of the Free National Movement. on behalf of the people of Killarney, who I have represented for nearly 2 decades. They have shown me tremendous support all these years. I remain grateful for this support. My job in this place is to give voice to them. Honour members, my job in this place is to give voice to them for better governance for our nation as a whole. It is a pleasure to be their representative in this place, and I look forward to continuing this representation.
Dr. Minnis was urged on by government members 4 weeks ago during a press conference at the party's headquarters. FNM leader Michael Pintard announced that he met with Dr. Minnis and asked him to serve the party in another capacity other than a candidate. Well, it appears as if Dr. Minnis intends to run in Killarney with or without a party nomination. It is a move that will force the FNM's hand, as Dr. Minnis could very well split the FNM vote and pave the way for a PLP victory in the Killarney constituency. You're watching JCN News. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back following these commercials.